So welcome back, everybody. Courtney and David here again today. The series of conversations we're having around at the moment are around these two methodologies that we each love in our own ways and are always finding ways to combine them more effectively for our clients. In the last one, we talked a lot about IEQ 9, the Enneagram, as a way of deepening our understanding of ourselves so that we can work more effectively with others and get great work done. And today we're going to be talking about this thing that I've fallen in love with called open space. And then again, we'll try and weave the two things together as we go in this conversation.
Yeah. So, David, open space is really interesting because I'd never really heard of it before you introduced me to it. But it's built on such simple, real, normal, everyday principles
Yes,
in a really interesting way. So,
yes.
can you tell us a little bit about how you came to that particular practice and yeah,
Yeah.
talk about your beginnings with that.
Yeah, and it's one of those stories which I'll tell the story, and then I often wonder what the the meaning behind the story. But because I'd the meaning behind the story is that I'd got to a point in my career where I was feeling a little trapped about the direction my consulting was going in. I was an independent consultant, which back then for me meant if a client said, "Can you help with this?" I'd say, "Yeah, of course. I'll see you in a couple of days,
Right.
I'll send you a proposal." And it was like, no, this is not, I need something to believe in. I need something powerful to believe in. So that's and then I think when you ask the universe for that sort of thing, the universe answers. And the answer for me came, I went to Mexico to a conference called Business and Consciousness, which they do not have anymore. But this was the early 2000s. It was in the time of the first internet boom. It was when Netscape Navigator company had people whose job was to bring in the cool people. I'm the
Yeah.
VP of bringing in the cool, all those. It was a heady time. Everything was possible back in the early 2000s. Anyway, so I went to this conference called Business and Consciousness because I've always been interested in both very practical business things and also spirituality and consciousness and things like that. And in the middle of this week full of various fabulous speakers and events and workshops, like the whole of the Wednesday was given over to this thing called open space, and I'd never heard of it. And so I went along, and I remember it was held in the biggest sort of ballroom that they had, and there were some risers at the end. And me being me, my little shy self, I thought, well, I'm not going to get involved. I don't know what's happening in this room, but I'm going to just sit on the risers and observe, see what's going on. And they're all sitting in a circle, and I could just hear that they were talking about a particular thing. And I saw somebody get up and take the microphone. And they said, "I want to talk about this idea." And and then they all went. And they went into these little groups. So they went from very, very large group. There must have been about 300 or 400 people in this room at the time. And all of a sudden they disappeared because they went off to these individual conversations that they'd invited each other to. And I went over to this thing that I learned is called the marketplace, and the marketplace is basically the agenda for the meeting, for the open space meeting, which is being created by the participants, by somebody getting up to say, in my response to the big question is, I want to talk about communication, or I want to talk about the application of Enneagram, or something like that. And they go off and they stick that piece of paper up on the marketplace of ideas, and that has a time with it, and it has a meeting space with it. And so whoever wants to go to that conversation goes to that conversation. And so I was looking at all of these things, and I suddenly found myself getting pulled to one of the topics. And I thought, oh, I want to go to that one. And I'm literally looking around myself, trying to get permission or ask permission to go to that one. And I realized that no, it was just if I want to go to this thing, apparently I'm allowed to go to this thing. I don't have to sign up or get a form or anything. I just go to that room. And I went into this room, and I had this experience of having the most, being part of, not having the most, being part of an amazing conversation, which came because the only people having the conversation in the room were people who had elected to be there. They had chosen by dint of them saying, I think I could add value to that, or I just want to be in the room there. It was a completely different level of conversation than I'd experienced before. And and then the open space carried on, and so I left that conference thinking, yeah, this is it. This is something which is giving me something to believe in how human beings could work together very naturally and gracefully. And yeah, I want to do a lot of it, you know.
Hmm. So tell us, I mean, it's such an inspiring story, and I mean, who doesn't want to be in the conversation they actually want to be in? So
No.
that's a nice
Duh.
novelty. But I think another thing that attracted me to it when you were talking about it and connected it to the work that I do with IQ9 was the idea that in those open space conversations, everybody is very equal.
Yes,
Everybody elects to be where they want to be. People
yes,
go, the people that show up are the right ones, and that
yes,
there are these very broad principles that govern a very big conversation that isn't just for a specific level of senior executive. And
yes.
so, can you tell us a bit more about how the structure of it works? Because it's not complicated, but then it has lots of elements.
It does, yeah, yeah. And it's interesting actually, because over the years, when I've been influencing clients to do the open space, depending on who they are and how they see the world. Maybe what their Enneagram type is. If it's somebody who I know wants a lot of structure, then I will say open space provides a lot of structure for a large group of people to have really amazing conversations
Yeah,
because they have very secure, very, very clear guidelines and principles to follow.
yeah.
If somebody's a bit more like, I want to tap into the group's energy, David, I say, well, open space is just a free-flowing, self-organizing thing. So, and both are true. Both are true.
Hmm.
But how it works is, pretty much the only thing that needs to be done before the open space is that the leadership team, it usually is a leadership team, needs to come up with the big question. And in open space, we always have that with a capital B, capital Q. And the big question is the question that they believe this group needs to answer in some way, but they as individuals do not know the answer. They might have a contribution to the answer, but they themselves. And an example I just had earlier on this week with a client of mine, she was talking about how she needs to lead the company from this phase that they're in, which they're doing very well in, and they need to continue to keep the operations running in the efficiency that they've just got it to, but they also need to make a step change. And I said that if we were doing up that is a definition of a big question. It's a critical question, but you don't know the answer to it. Because if you knew the answer to it, you just told people to do it because you're the boss. Yeah. But she doesn't know the answer. She needs to tap into the collective on that and get lots of different perspectives on what the answer could be. So the only thing that needs to happen in advance is the identification of the big question. And then actually the next thing is who are we going to invite? You know, who has got something they might want to say to that big question? And so often we tend to think of, if I were working with a group of engineers, they might think, well, we'll invite 70 people from the engineering community. That's the traditional way of thinking about it. To which I'd say, well, what about some of your stakeholders? Do you think they'd be interested in answering this big question? Because particularly if the big question is something to do with engaging more with stakeholders, maybe the stakeholders want to be in the room, you know.
Hmm.
And Harrison Owen who's the guy who created Open Space, says that, part of the work is to bring in the edges, invite the edges of a community, a society, an organization, because it's some of those edges that might bring real insight and wisdom to the group, you know. So you got your big question, you've got the invitational list, and then given how big the invitational list is, then you need to find a big enough room to have it. I've run open spaces with 20 people in them. The biggest one I ever run was 600 people. So clearly you need different sort of sizes of rooms. But pretty much then that's all the preparation is needed. And then you start running through the open space itself.
Okay, so when they get to the space, how does
Yeah.
it work?
Well, the one of the things I truly love about facilitating open space is that it starts in a circle, which of course for many business people is an incredibly uncomfortable thing, So you get your usual, as people come in, you get the usual jokes about, oh, it's come by your time, or is this Alcoholics Anonymous? They sit in the circle, don't they? So
Yeah.
once we've gone through those exact same two jokes, I say just find a space, sit down, And really the fascinating thing about it. when they come into the room and you first clock their faces and they go, "What? It's a circle." That's always a joy for me personally. And the other joy is when you then you watch people trying to find the front of the circle because they are so
Yeah.
used to walking into a room. It's like, where's the front of the room? It's where the screen is, or where the PowerPoint slides are, whatever. They're so traditionally focused on the front of the thing. Well, where's the front of the circle? Because there
Yeah.
isn't one. So anyway,
You and I saw that recently when we were working on one of these where that the facility trying to help us put the circle together was
yeah,
struggling
yeah,
to manifest the idea that, but do you want rows? No, circle. But do
yeah.
you want rows in the circle? No, just a circle.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, Peter Block, the consultants of the thing, he's very passionate about the shape of the room determines the quality of the conversation.
Hmm.
And, we need to look to the front of the room where the screen is, where the boss is or whatever, to get instruction or information or inspiration occasionally. But if we are needing to answer big questions, we need to turn to one another.
Hmm.
Because if it was possible to put the answer on the slide, we'd look to the front of the room and we'd go and do it. We don't. A lot of the questions I think in our world are these big questions. They have a real level of complexity to them. They have a real level of possible emotional connection in them as well. So yeah. So it starts in a circle. And basically, I as a facilitator would at some point unveil the big question. Prior to that, you might get the leader or leaders to say a few words to give a context to this conversation. So interesting information that people will need to have ahead of the conversations they have. So, for example, one open space I ran was about we need to generate cash very fast. And by fast, we mean 9 months. So don't please come up with ideas that are going to take 18 months, because that's not going to be it. So any context or information which is going to shape the conversations is done in advance. And then we're off into the various ways of opening the space. And that's based around what they call the one law and the four principles.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so talk a little bit about how the marketplace and the one law and the four principles work in terms of how people start interacting with that.
Yeah, yeah. So there's I mean, open space, like many of the sort of ancient ways of being, there's symbology behind it as well. So, the open space, because if you got a circle of, or concentric circles, if it's a large group, but a circle of, the one you're referring to, 30 or 40 people sitting in one circle, the open space in the middle, because it's completely open in the middle, represents the uh, the sort of potential of this group to come up with various answers. Yeah, it's
Hmm.
completely open to our imagination and sense of possibility. So
Hmm.
there's the open space in the middle, which is us, and then there's an open space on the wall, which is called the marketplace, and that's basically going to become the agenda of this meeting. And so what the facilitator does is names the big question and then invites anybody who has a possible answer to that question or half an idea or a hunch or whatever to get up, say a few words about it. They write down a headline on a piece of paper for that topic. So I think we need to answer that big question by improving communication between teams in this company. They would
Hmm.
write improving communication amongst teams and they could stick it on the wall. And the marketplace is basically a grid of meeting times throughout the day or days. Open space can operate over one day or three or somewhere in between. And then down the side, there's some meeting spaces. So I'm going to be hosting a conversation about improving communication at meeting space A at 11:30. And then basically the principles allow people to self-organize. And what that basically means is they will go to the conversations that they feel moved to go to. It's about I want to go to that because I'm passionate about improving communication too, or I have some expertise in it.
Hmm.
So that's how it
Hmm.
works. Yeah.
Great. So, with all of these elements and the curiosity element that comes in, and what do you see being some of the outcomes that come out of, they move through these phases of conversation,
Yeah.
and then when they get to the end of the day, where do they take all this information and conversation that they've gathered
Yeah, that's right.
and move it ahead?
Yeah, it's very much. I mean, there's a couple of again images around the open space work. One is that the big group starts together and then it separates into small groups and then it comes back together the big group maybe at lunchtime just to check in on how it's going, and that's often called, it's how the universe breathes in and out, it's like big
Yeah.
group, small group, big group, small group. The other shape of open space is that we spend a lot of the time, let's say it is a 1 day open space, we'll spend sort of 60% of the day divergent thinking, accessing all the ideas that might answer the big question. Let's give ourselves permission to have some crazy ideas or some very sensible ideas, very practical, or some ideas that we'll need to really work on to make them practical. So that's the divergent thinking. And then, yes, you're right, because open space is about creating action. It's not about sitting in a circle having great conversations. It's having great conversations so we can choose as a group what 3 or 4, and it's usually about 3 or 4 main items are going to be selected to take forward.
Hmm.
And that's done with a very simple voting process. So again, it's the group that decides of all of these, say, 20 conversations we've had today, these 4 will move us fastest or more effectively towards the answering the big question.
Hmm.
And at
Hmm.
that point, the group breaks down again around the 4, and they go into deep action planning. So
Okay.
you leave time for the group not just to say, good, we are going to lead this starting next week when we get back to the real world. What can we do starting now? How can we draw up a plan here? How can we draw up a strategy? How can we draw up roles and responsibilities?
Hmm.
How can we, in one open space I did, people were literally calling people who weren't in the open space but back in the organization to set up meetings. So
Hmm.
they've got this sense of we've started making change happen, and we haven't even left the room yet.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, it's very
Well, and
powerful.
and I was finding that, the curiosity that came into the group we were working with last was they had had these couple of days of Enneagram work before, and then when they went into open space, I think I was reflecting this in the conversation we had about the Enneagram previously.
Yes,
There were people that were starting to really select elements of what they'd learned about themselves or other people to organize around in different ways. So maybe that had something to do with um, how they interacted with the information and
yes,
gave themselves a different kind of permission to do that. Maybe it
yes,
had to do with how they leaned on other leaders and let other people kind of elevate their perspective because
yes,
they recognized it was okay if not everybody played the same role.
yes,
And also just the autonomy and sovereignty of like really speaking to all of these elements
yes.
no matter which part of the day that came in,
That's
and,
right.
and understanding that they all had parallel voice in that room. That was
Yes,
an interesting connection to the Enneagram idea that we're all of those things, right?
yes,
So
yes,
I think that group we were just working with was really looking for the resonance between those two things. And I
yes,
think we're still working with them now, seeing them really activate a lot
yes.
of that, which
Yeah,
is quite lovely to see that,
yeah,
I think that's the biggest thing you and I've talked about over time is this like problem that exists in consulting and management consulting where a consultant is called in and they do some work and maybe it's great for a day, but then
mm,
what?
mm,
And so if they
yes,
don't leave it with something, then there's always information
yes,
decay very, very quickly, like
yes,
hours, if not 1 day later.
yes.
And so if you don't have some kind of anchor and tangibility to it that's followed through with, and this offers us so much opportunity for follow through.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and that's, it's one of the many amazing things for me about open space is that it does produce, as you go from that divergent thinking into selecting what we are taking forward and creating action before we leave the room. It's not just like, oh, good, we made some priorities here, but we are owning these priorities. We get the sense of we are doing this. We as this particular action team with this particular topic, we own this, but also we're doing it alongside other sets of we's, all interested in solving the big questions so that this company can move forward. And that's a rare experience for many people when they come to events like this. They might
Hmm.
get some information that's interesting or some technique, they learn it, they do a bit of training or whatever. But to have that experience of really stepping into their own leadership,
Hmm.
I mean, and
Hmm.
as you say, that sense of We're all equal in this circle. Anybody can get up and say, I've got an idea. And so
Hmm.
you'll see that, with the company we were talking about, there were people there who were on the board, the executive team standing up and leading things. And there were people in the HR department, and, the people who've been in the company 3 weeks, people who've been in the company 20 years, all
Yeah.
of them getting up. Yeah, and I'm sure everybody who stands up, and it's true for me when I've been in an open space, when I stand up, I think, I bet nobody comes to my session. But they always do. Somebody will come. And the first principle of open space is whoever comes are the right people
Hmm.
because they've chosen to be there. And so whether it's 3 people or 30 people in your group, you'll have this experience of, wow, we're all committed to this thing. How great does that feel to me as the person who stood up and invited it? It's a
Right,
really,
right.
really, it's, I mean, we think of open space as a thing that creates all these actions for the company, but it's a great development opportunity for people as well.
Yes, yes, absolutely. On the speaking level, on the confidence level, president's presence,
Yes.
not just presence level. And I think the other thing I noticed was, I play a different role when I'm sitting in that open space environment
Yes.
because I usually have done the pre-work with them, and then
Yes.
I'm sitting there supporting the work via the lens of the Enneagram in the room. But I found that I was noticing some groups would start small and get very large by the end of the session, and then you would
Yeah.
find I remember one where there were only a couple of people, but that became a huge point of conversation in
Yes.
other conversations later. So it wasn't
Yes.
about the volume of people, it was about why behind a lot of, and the other thing that occurs to me is, in a lot of other environments of these kind of meetings, you have fill in the blank level of senior team go to the meeting, and then they come back and they translate to the best of their abilities what they learned, what they took in, but they're
Yes.
tired, they're distracted, they have other things on their plate, they're missing work to be there. There are so many variables, and the
Yes.
the people receiving the information, on the other hand, who will be the activators, aren't getting any firsthand experience.
No.
So just that firsthand experience by itself, I think
Yes.
has so much value to saying we honor you as a voice in this company,
Yes.
and also you have your own interpretation of what happens next.
Yes.
There is a really interesting empowerment to that.
There really is. Yeah, and you could absolutely say to an organization who is looking to increasing the quality of engagement amongst its people, this is a great opportunity to do that,
Right, right.
because open space says we are all welcome, we're all equal, we're all talented adults here, we've all got opinions and ideas. Stand up and talk about your passion. Take
Right,
responsibility for it as well, though. Don't just say, I think we should do this and I hope somebody else takes that idea. No, I'm prepared to lead this thing. And then you
right,
get people stepping into their leadership when they do not have the job title of leader. And it's a
right, right.
very, very inspiring thing, I think, for a lot of people. There's one final thing as well about outcomes I'll say, Courtney, is that, in the old model of going off on a way day or a way workshop or whatever, and coming up with ideas which you then need to go back to the real world and start to activate. You usually need to start by persuading other people that it's a good idea. In open
Hmm.
space, you've already done
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
You've already
Hmm.
sold the idea to yourselves and you're doing it, so there isn't that lag
Hmm.
of, all right, we had an idea at the offsite, we're trying to get it back in the organization. And no, we already convinced ourselves this is the right thing. So that whole idea of trying to persuade other people, don't need to do it. We're already down the line. We're already into
Right,
the activation, into the
right.
execution of it, and that's a rare thing as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that there's another interesting layer to that in that, I just recently started pulling this into my work, but there's a realness to the forgetting curve, that it only takes about an hour or so for the decay of the information they learned to
Mm,
leave them, because there's just so much going on in our minds. So,
yes.
if you try to export all of that over a weekend or 2 days at the end of a week and a weekend, and then it's still a game of telephone from leaders to other people, and
Yes.
then you're trying to activate it, that's a lot of barrier to entry.
Yes. That's right.
So, I
Yeah.
think we're lowering all those levels. And I think the other thing we've talked about with open space and the combination of open space and IEQ 9 or
Mm,
Enneagram, and we have a special way of framing that we'll talk about in another conversation, but
yes.
is I think it's, we've talked a lot about how change management has been taught as a theory, but change is really activated action.
Yes.
And change is natural. So if we
Yes.
go with humans know how to deal with change, and we go with
Yes.
humans are feel empowered by activated
Yes.
action, this is such a great combination catalyst for
Yes, it
that
is.
and is a very different approach than most
Yes.
conversations you have about change management. Because
Yes.
we're not teaching you a model. We're
No.
not asking you to memorize an acronym. We're not
Yeah.
asking you to walk away and apply it to your work and good luck. I hope it happens for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
saying, let's do it here. Let's get the real people activating in the right time. And let's
Yeah.
get the energy and the feeling, honestly, that people are really unifying around right now, I think, of being together in
Being
person.
together. Yeah.
There's a big, big, big deal behind
Yes.
that. And
Yes.
and I think we're getting a renaissance
Yes.
in understanding that being together in person is one of the most impactful things we can do.
Exactly right. One
Yeah.
final piece from me, and then maybe we can wrap up. But at
Yeah.
the end of the open space, after you've done all the action team things and everybody's got this sense of things really carrying on beyond the open space, I usually do what's called a closing circle because it is, as you said at the beginning of this, you only came across it recently. I know open space as it is, as being created, 35, 40 years ago now by Harrison Owen, but it's based on principles of how human beings have connected for centuries, millennia.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, but I do this closing circle because it's still for many people a very unusual way, and so I just give them a chance to talk about it. Almost always, somebody in the closing circle will say, "I wish my day was a bit more like this every day."
Yeah.
And what they mean is, I'm going back to a world which is actually based on fragmentation and separation and team over here and team over there and whatever. And they have this experience of being part of a whole bigger than themselves.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's that's again very powerful stuff to give
Ab
people.
Absolutely. I think the team we most recently worked with had a lot of new people and they're going through a lot of change. And
Yeah.
the new people were so inspired by being, and the people who've been around for a long time were so inspired by getting to know the new people. So
Yes.
yeah, I mean, it really is like a culture retreat in and of itself too,
Yes.
which is quite beautiful. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
thanks for explaining this to us, David, because such an important method, but I think kind of a hidden gem. And
Hidden
so,
gem. Yeah.
really glad that it's getting activated and we're turning it into something new with blending it with other things too. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so let's continue these conversations and go deeper into some of these things because both with the Enneagram and open space, these things are wonderful, insightful experiences and they make good things happen, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing we've been talking about just kind of offline this week too, that's really important to this is, you know, old is kind of new,
Yeah, absolutely.
like maybe if we have people out there like hunting for a solution or trying to figure out what they should do next on something, like often the answer is either within or it's simple and it's
Yes.
low tech.
Yes.
And interconnected and based on, as you said, the principles of the way people have done things for a long time. The
Yes.
Enneagram goes back to sacred geometry as well. So,
Yes.
a lot of what we're talking about is based on things that are very historically concrete and
Yes.
useful. And
Yes.
I think it's often important for us to clear our minds and realize we don't necessarily need all the noise and dopamine hits and constancy of the
Yes.
way that we currently live. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
so glad you brought this one to my attention. So thank you for the conversation.
Great pleasure. Thank you, Courtney. See you next time.
Okay, thank you.